Why did I become a fraud examiner? That's a good question. So I take you back to, I think it was my third job since getting out of college. I had moved to Florida cold, and I found a job as an assistant controller at a car dealership. And it's my first day in the office. I have an accounting background. And so I show up there. My boss, who went to the same college as me, she says, I want you to take a look at these financial statements for the different dealerships we have, just so you can familiarize yourself with the accounts and things like that. And I'm like, I can do that. And so I'm looking through the financial statements. I get to one dealership and I'm just looking at the numbers and everything, and something immediately jumps out to me. Because the first thing you learn in accounting, and it's on that CFE exam, and you better not have missed this question, because if I taught you and you missed this question, I'm going to come find you. The accounting equation: assets equal liabilities plus equity. And so I'm looking at this financial statement and I see assets don't equal liabilities plus equity. Now, I'm nervous because it's my first day on the job, and I'm like, is there something in the car industry that I don't know that will make this happen? And so I spend a good hour and a half using my little calculator, footing each column, adding up the numbers, and they still add up to those inconsistent numbers. And finally, I get enough courage and I walk into my boss's office. She's like, hey, how you doing? I said, I'm doing good. I'm kind of, getting familiar with the different accounts and stuff, but I got a question for you. She goes, sure. Tell me what question you got. I said, shouldn't assets equal liabilities plus equity? And man, you should have seen the look on her face. She was like, who have I hired? Because if he doesn't know that, then we are in trouble. And she says, yeah. And I smiled real big. I said, good. Now tell me why this doesn't add up. And she looks at it and she says, oh, that's a problem. And so I start looking at it. She says, your job now is to find out why this is in this case. And so I go to the dealership. It's a small dealership. There's one person accounting team. So she takes care of every deal. And I start digging through all the records, all the different deal files. And every time I got close to figuring out, it ended up being a dead end. And so now I'm 4 months into it. I'm like, I can't figure this out. So what the solution we finally come to is we have to shut down the system. This is the entire system for that car dealer. Shut it down and print out the history of transactions since the inception, which had only been in existence for like 2.5 years. And so I left that night knowing that when I came back the next day, I'd have this big pile of papers to go through. And funny thing happened the next day. That one person accounting team, they didn't show up for work. And I'm like, And so I went over there, grabbed that stuff. I start going through it. About page 70 is when I see my first problem. It's a one-sided accounting entry. And then I keep flipping, and there's 4 or 5 of them. And it just happened to coincide with every time I got close to the problem, all of a sudden the one-sided entry changed it. And so she knew what was going on. And that's why she didn't show up to work. What eventually happened, we found that a car that cost about $55,000, the customer was able to get it for $15,000. The customer knew that something was wrong, but he basically said, I wasn't going to tell you guys until you came after me. They eventually got the money from him and everybody was made whole. But the person that worked in the accounting office never came back. And what happened, I found out later, was that she didn't have an accounting education. She just had a high school education. She was learning as she went along. She didn't know what to do with it. The flaw was in the computer system for the dealership. They created their own accounting system instead of using one that was off the shelf. They allowed one-sided entries. And then, to set it all off, what really led me to the fraud possession, and specifically the FBI, is I found a $45,000 error. And I made $20,000 at the time. Supervisor comes up to me and says, good job, Bret, walks away. And I'm like, man, that was fun to do, but I sure didn't get any satisfaction from them. The FBI came calling right after that, and I'm like, sign me up. And after that, fraud was my thing. I loved it. I loved trying to put those pieces of the puzzle together to see if I can use the rules and still get enough evidence to convict them. That's how I got into fraud.